New York City has a rhythm all its own, a relentless, throbbing pulse that never ceases, never falters. From the moment you step onto its streets, the city grabs hold of you, demanding your attention with the sirens, the chatter, the clatter of heels on concrete, and the roar of traffic. It's a city that thrives on noise, on chaos, on the stories that bubble up from the gutters and skyscrapers alike. For most, it's overwhelming. For me, it's fuel. My name is Porter Wren, and I've built my career, and my life, on that chaos. As a tabloid writer, I'm not in the business of comfort or truth, I'm in the business of stories. The juicier, the better. Murders, scandals, heartbreaks, if it bleeds, it leads. That's the mantra. The city gives me plenty to work with, more than any one man could ever hope to uncover. But I've walked the streets of Manhattan for years, a silent observer of its darkest corners. I've seen the underbelly that most people are content to ignore, that they're afraid to even acknowledge. I've written about the bodies pulled from the East River, the politicians caught with their pants down, the celebrities who fell from grace. I expose the secrets people try to bury, the truths they'd rather forget. And I do it all from behind the safety of my words, hiding in plain sight, yet, when the sun sets and the city's shadows stretch long, I step away from that world. I cross the threshold of my brownstone in Brooklyn, where the city's hum is muted, where life slows just enough to catch my breath. My wife, Lisa, is there, waiting with a smile that's become both my refuge and my burden. She knows what I do for a living, but she doesn't know the half of it, the late nights spent chasing leads, the bloodstains on my conscience, the way the stories seep into my soul. To her, I'm just a husband, a father to our 2 kids, a man who comes home every night, no matter what. She doesn't see the cracks in the facade, and I do my best to keep it that way. That I often wonder how long I can keep up the act. How long before the stories I write start writing me, pulling me under, blurring the lines between the man I am and the one I pretend to be. How long before the city swallows me whole, leaving nothing but the shadow of a man who once thought he could control the narrative. But that's the thing about New York, it doesn't sleep, and neither do the stories. They're always out there, lurking, waiting to be told. And as long as there are stories to tell, I'll be there, pen in hand, ready to expose the darkness that thrives in the heart of the city that never sleeps. For now, I'll continue to walk that line, balancing my 2 lives, hoping that neither collapses under the weight of the secrets I carry. But in New York, nothing stays hidden for long. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when you least expect it, and when it does, I'll be there to write it. It was one of those nights when the city seemed to hum with an electricity that crackled in the air, sending shivers down your spine even in the warmest of weather. I had just finished a piece on a Wall Street scandal, one that would undoubtedly sell a few thousand copies by morning. I was ready to call it a night, craving nothing more than the quiet of my brownstone, the feel of my wife's embrace, and the innocence of my kids' laughter. But New York had other plans. The bar was dimly lit, the kind of place where people go to disappear. The walls were lined with dark wood, and the air carried the scent of whiskey and secrets. I was nursing a drink, my mind already halfway home, when she walked in. Caroline Crowley was the kind of woman who commanded attention without saying a word. Tall, slender, with a cascade of blonde hair that caught the light just so. She moved with a grace that seemed out of place in the dingy bar. Her eyes were a deep shade of blue, the kind that could drown a man if he wasn't careful. She didn't look like she belonged there. But then again, neither did I. Our eyes met across the room, and I knew, without knowing how, that she was there for me. She walked over, her heels clicking softly against the worn floorboards, and slid into the seat next to me. Up close, she was even more striking, with an air of sadness that only made her more alluring. Porter Wren. Her voice was low, smooth, with just a hint of desperation. "That's me," I replied, setting my drink down. "What can I do for you, Ms. Crowley?" "Caroline Crowley," she said, her gaze never wavering. "I need your help, Mr. Wren. I've heard you're good at uncovering the truth, no matter how buried it is." I leaned back in my seat, studying her. There was something about the way she spoke, the urgency in her voice, that told me this wasn't a typical case. "Depends on the truth. What exactly are you looking for?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "My husband, Simon, was murdered. They said it was an accident, a break-in gone wrong. But I know that's not true. Simon was working on something before he died, something that got him killed. I need to know what it was. I need to know who did this to him." Simon Crowley. The name rang a bell. He was a filmmaker, known for his dark, thought-provoking documentaries. His death had made headlines, but like so many stories in this city, it had faded from public memory, replaced by the next big scandal. A break-in gone wrong, that was the official story. But in my line of work, you learn that the official story is often just a cover for something far more sinister. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, meaning it. "But why come to me? There are plenty of investigators in this city." Caroline's eyes locked onto mine, and I could see the fear hidden beneath her calm exterior. "Because you're not just any investigator, Mr. Wren. You dig deeper. You expose what others are too afraid to touch. Simon trusted you, he admired your work. He said if anything ever happened to him, you were the one to call." That caught me off guard. I hadn't known Simon personally, but I was familiar with his work, and apparently, he had been familiar with mine. I felt a tug of curiosity, the same pull that had driven me to uncover so many hidden truths before. But this was different. This was personal. What was Simon working on? I asked, leaning forward, intrigued despite myself. Caroline took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "A film. His last project. He didn't tell me much about it, only that it was dangerous. He said it would expose things, people, who didn't want to be exposed. And then, before he could finish it, he was killed." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the need for closure, for justice. But I also saw something else, fear. Caroline was terrified, and not just of losing her husband. She was scared that whoever had killed Simon might come for her next. That I should have walked away. I should have told her that it wasn't my problem, that I had my own life to worry about, my own family to protect. But I didn't. I couldn't. The city had its hooks in me, and so did she. "I'll help you," I said, the words escaping before I could think them through. "But I need to see what Simon was working on. I need to know everything." Caroline's relief was palpable, her shoulders sagging as though a great weight had been lifted. "Thank you, Mr. Wren. You don't know what this means to me. I had a feeling I was about to find out." As Caroline handed me a flash drive, "It's all I have," she said, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something far more dangerous than I'd anticipated. Something that could destroy everything I'd built, everything I held dear, but it was too late to turn back now. The story had found me, and I was already in too deep. Back in my office, the city's neon lights flickered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Caroline sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she watched me insert the flash drive into my laptop. The hum of the computer seemed louder than usual, a foreboding sound that heightened the tension in the room. I clicked on the only file on the drive, labeled Final Cut. The screen went black for a moment, and then the footage began to play. The first few seconds were shaky, the camera adjusting to focus. It was raw, unpolished, and immediately unsettling. The scene opened on a dimly lit room, no, a warehouse. The walls were lined with crates, some marked with strange symbols I couldn't decipher. In the center of the room stood a group of men, their faces obscured by shadows. They were speaking in hushed tones, but the audio was too distorted to make out their words. The camera angle suggested Simon had been filming from a hidden vantage point, careful to remain undetected. As the men continued their conversation, the camera zoomed in, capturing a briefcase being passed from one man to another. The man who accepted the briefcase opened it just enough to reveal stacks of cash, along with what appeared to be a small black device. The camera lingered on the device, and I could sense Simon's interest in it. It was small, unassuming, but there was something about it, something that set my instincts on edge. Whatever it was, it had been important enough for Simon to risk his life to capture it on film. The scene cut abruptly to a different location. The camera now focused on a man, middle-aged, with a gaunt face and piercing eyes. He sat in a nondescript office, the walls bare except for a single window that overlooked the city. Simon's voice came through, muffled but clear enough to understand. "Who are they?" Simon asked. The man's expression didn't change. "You don't want to know. Why are they paying you?" "Protection," the man replied, his tone clipped. "But it's more than that. They're covering their tracks. Whatever they're planning, it's big. Bigger than anything you've seen." The footage cut out again, and when it resumed, it was clear that something had gone wrong. The camera was shaking, the image blurred as Simon ran, the sound of heavy breathing filling the audio. He was fleeing, the lens bouncing wildly as he turned corners, sprinting down narrow alleys. The footage ended with a sudden, sickening thud, the camera hitting the ground. The last thing recorded was the view of Simon's hand reaching out, grasping for the camera before the screen went black. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. The footage was incomplete, disjointed, but it was enough to paint a grim picture. Simon had stumbled onto something dangerous, something he shouldn't have seen. The men in the warehouse, the briefcase with the mysterious device, the gaunt man's warning, all of it pointed to a conspiracy far beyond the scope of a simple murder. Caroline's voice broke the silence. "Do you understand now?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. Simon wasn't just killed because of a break-in. He was murdered because of this. I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. Who were the men in the warehouse? Did Simon recognize any of them? Caroline shook her head. He didn't tell me much, just that they were powerful, connected. He was scared, Porter. I've never seen him like that before. Whatever they're planning, it's dangerous, maybe even catastrophic. I leaned forward, my mind piecing together the fragments of information. The man in the office, the one Simon was interviewing, did he say anything else? Anything that could give us a lead? No, she said softly, her voice trembling. After that meeting, Simon became paranoid. He said we were being watched, that we had to be careful. Then, just days later, he was dead. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, but there were still too many gaps, too many unanswered questions. What was the device in the briefcase? Who were the men in the warehouse, and why had they killed Simon to protect their secret? And most importantly, how far were they willing to go to keep that secret buried? Caroline, I said, my voice firm, this isn't just a story anymore. It's a matter of life and death. If I dig into this, if I go down this path, there's no turning back. Are you sure you want to do this? She looked at me, her eyes filled with determination and a hint of desperation. I have to know the truth, Porter. Simon died for it. I can't let that be for nothing. Her words resonated with me. I had spent my career uncovering the truth, no matter how dark or dangerous it was. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. My life, my family, everything was on the line. I'll help you, I said finally, my voice steady. But we need to be careful. These people are dangerous, and they won't hesitate to come after us if they think we're getting too close. Caroline nodded, her resolve clear. Whatever it takes. As I watched the city lights flicker through the blinds, I knew I was about to dive headfirst into a darkness I might not be able to escape. The unfinished film was more than just a clue, it was a warning. And if Simon had paid the ultimate price for what he'd uncovered, then I was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. The city has a way of getting under your skin, like a toxin that seeps into your veins, clouding your judgment, distorting your reality. I've always prided myself on being able to keep my head above water, to navigate the murky waters of Manhattan's underworld without losing myself in it. But Caroline Crowley was different. She wasn't just another story or another source, she was something more, something that gnawed at the edges of my mind, pulling me in deeper than I ever intended to go. The days after I watched Simon's unfinished film were a blur of restless nights and uneasy days. I couldn't shake the images from my mind, the men in the warehouse, the briefcase with the black device, the fear in Simon's voice. But more than that, I couldn't shake Caroline. She had a hold on me, one that was as intoxicating as it was dangerous, that I told myself it was just the case, that I was drawn to her because she represented the key to unlocking Simon's murder. But that was a lie, and deep down, I knew it. Caroline was more than just a puzzle piece. She was a force of nature, and I was caught in her orbit, unable to break free. That we met frequently, under the guise of discussing the investigation. Each time, I found myself drawn closer to her, captivated by the way she moved, the way she spoke, the way her eyes seemed to see right through me. There was a vulnerability in her that contrasted sharply with the icy exterior she presented to the world, and I found myself wanting to protect her, to be the one she could rely on. It was a dangerous impulse, one that I knew could cost me everything. One evening, we met at a small cafe on the Lower East Side. It was a place I frequented when I needed to think, to clear my head. But that night, I couldn't focus on anything but her. She sat across from me, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee, her eyes fixed on mine. "Have you found anything new?" she asked, her voice low, almost hesitant. That I nodded, though my mind was only half on the case. "I'm following some leads, but it's slow going. These people are careful, and they cover their tracks well. But I'll find something, Caroline. I promise." She smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that cut through me like a knife. "You don't have to do this, you know. You don't have to put yourself in danger for me." "I want to," I replied before I could stop myself. "It's not just about the story anymore. I care about what happens to you." Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected that response. For a moment, we sat in silence, the air between us charged with something unspoken. I could feel the pull of her, the way she seemed to draw me in without even trying. It was more than just attraction, it was an obsession, one that was beginning to blur the lines between my professional duty and my personal desires. That I knew I was treading dangerous ground. I was a married man, a father, someone who had always prided himself on his integrity. But with Caroline, all of that seemed to slip away, replaced by a need I couldn't quite understand. It wasn't just about solving the case anymore, it was about being close to her, about understanding her in a way no one else could. After we finished our coffee, I walked her back to her apartment. The night was cool, a breeze rustling through the trees that lined the street. We didn't speak much, but the silence between us was comfortable, almost intimate. When we reached her building, she turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. "Thank you, Porter. For everything." I nodded, unable to find the right words. I wanted to say so much more, to tell her how she had invaded my thoughts, how I couldn't stop thinking about her. But I held back, knowing that once those words were spoken, there would be no going back. She stepped closer, her hand brushing against mine. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me, igniting something deep within. I could feel the tension between us, the way it crackled in the air like a live wire. I knew what was coming, and part of me wanted it, wanted to give in to the temptation that had been building between us. But as she leaned in, her breath warm against my skin, a flash of guilt pierced through the fog in my mind. Lisa. My wife. My children. The life I had worked so hard to build, the life I was risking for a woman I barely knew. That I pulled back, my voice rough as I spoke. Caroline, I can't, she froze, her eyes searching mine for an explanation, for a reason why I was rejecting her. But I couldn't find the words, couldn't explain the war raging inside me. I'm sorry, I said finally, stepping away. I have to go. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. The night seemed colder now, the breeze biting at my skin. I forced myself to keep walking, to ignore the voice in my head that screamed at me to turn back, to go to her, but I couldn't. I had crossed enough lines already, and I knew that if I gave in to this temptation, there would be no coming back, yet, even as I walked away, I couldn't shake the image of Caroline from my mind. She was a part of me now, a dark obsession that I couldn't escape. And as I disappeared into the shadows of the city, I knew that no matter how hard I tried to resist, I was already too far gone. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose, the fog of the previous night's temptation lifting just enough for me to see the path ahead. I had made a promise to Caroline, and despite the chaos she had stirred within me, I intended to keep it. If Simon Crowley had died because of what he uncovered, then it was my job to finish what he started. My first stop was Simon's production studio, a modest space tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city. It was the kind of place where creative dreams were made and shattered in equal measure. The building was nondescript, a far cry from the glamorous image often associated with the film industry. Inside, it was even less impressive, just a couple of small offices and an editing suite that looked like it hadn't been updated in a decade. I flashed my press credentials at the receptionist, a bored-looking woman in her 20s who barely glanced up from her phone. I'm here to speak with anyone who worked with Simon Crowley on his last project, I said, trying to sound more official than I felt. She raised an eyebrow, finally giving me her full attention. You a cop? Journalist, I corrected. Porter Wren. I'm following up on Simon's death. Her expression softened, and she nodded, pointing me toward a door at the end of the hallway. Talk to Mark. He was Simon's right-hand man. If anyone knows anything, it's him. I found Mark hunched over a desk in the editing suite, his eyes bloodshot from too many hours staring at a screen. He was younger than I expected, probably in his early 30s, with a scruffy beard and a worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked up as I entered, a mixture of curiosity and wariness in his gaze. You must be Mark, I said, extending a hand. He shook it, his grip firm but distracted. Yeah. You're here about Simon, right? That's right. I'm trying to piece together what he was working on before he died. Anything you can tell me would be helpful. Mark sighed, leaning back in his chair. Simon was a genius, but he was also a bit of a madman. He had this idea that he could change the world with his films, expose the truth that everyone else was too scared to touch. His last project, well, that was the one he thought would really make a difference. What was it about? I pressed, sensing that Mark knew more than he was letting on. It was supposed to be about corruption in the city, big money, dirty politics, that sort of thing. But as he dug deeper, it became something else. He started meeting with these shady people. Guys who didn't like being filmed, didn't want their names in the credits. Simon wouldn't tell me much, just that he was onto something huge, something that could blow the lid off everything. Do you know who these people were? Or what they were involved in? Mark hesitated, glancing around the room as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. I don't know their names, but they were dangerous. Simon didn't scare easily, but these guys, they had him rattled. He started getting paranoid, thinking they were following him, tapping his phone, that sort of thing. I told him to back off, to drop the whole thing, but he wouldn't listen. He said it was too important. The room felt colder as Mark spoke, the gravity of his words sinking in. Did Simon ever mention a specific lead, something that made him think he was in danger? Mark nodded slowly. Yeah, he mentioned a meeting, one he was supposed to film, but he never did. Said it was too risky, that just being there would be enough to put him on their radar. After that, he started locking everything up, notes, footage, anything related to the project. He said he'd rather destroy it all than let it fall into the wrong hands. Do you know where he kept those things? I asked, my pulse quickening. In a safe, here at the studio. I don't know the combination, though. Simon was the only one who had it. But if you want to take a look, be my guest. Mark gestured to a metal door in the corner of the room. I crossed the room, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The safe was small but solid, built to withstand more than just a casual attempt to crack it. I studied the lock, trying to think of a way to get it open without alerting the wrong people. There had to be something inside that would give me a clue, something Simon had left behind. Do you mind if I take a look around? I asked, turning back to Mark. Go ahead. Just be careful. Simon's enemies, they're not the kind you want to piss off. Mark's warning hung in the air as I began to search the room. I went through the usual places first, drawers, filing cabinets, desk surfaces, but found nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. It wasn't until I checked the small bookshelf in the corner that I found something of interest. There, tucked between volumes on film theory and cinematography, was a small leather-bound notebook. I pulled it out, my heart pounding as I flipped it open. Inside were pages of notes, scribbled in Simon's hurried handwriting. Dates, names, locations, all of it seemed to be connected to his last project. But the more I read, the more I realized that these weren't just notes, they were warnings. Simon had been documenting his fears, his suspicions that he was being watched, that his life was in danger. One entry stood out among the rest. Met with M today. Told me about the device. They're using it to monitor communications, blackmail key figures. If they find out I know, I'm dead. I stared at the words, a chill running down my spine. The device, the one Simon had captured on film. It wasn't just a piece of technology, it was the key to everything. Whoever controlled it had the power to manipulate, to destroy, to kill. And Simon had gotten too close to the truth that I pocketed the notebook, knowing it was only a matter of time before someone realized it was missing. Mark watched me as I stood, his expression unreadable. "Find anything useful?" he asked, though the look in his eyes told me he knew I had. "Maybe," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "But I need to dig deeper." "Thanks for your help, Mark." He nodded, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. "Just be careful, Porter." Simon wasn't paranoid for nothing. These people don't play by the rules. I left the studio with more questions than answers, but I knew one thing for certain: Simon Crowley had been killed because of what he knew, and if I wasn't careful, I could be next. But that wasn't enough to stop me. I had a lead now, a direction to follow. The investigation had begun, and I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter where it led. As I stepped out into the cold New York air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere in the shadows, someone was waiting for me to slip up. But I pushed the fear aside, focusing on the task at hand. There was still so much I didn't know, so many pieces of the puzzle that were missing. But one thing was clear: I was no longer just a journalist chasing a story. I was a man caught in a deadly game, and the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. New York is a city of secrets. It thrives on them, feeds on them, and buries them deep beneath its glittering surface. I've spent years unraveling those secrets, exposing the hidden rot that lies beneath the city's veneer of power and prestige. But as I delved deeper into Simon Crowley's death, I began to realize that some secrets were buried for a reason. My investigation had started as a quest to find a murderer, but it was quickly becoming something else, something far more dangerous and complex than I had ever anticipated. The notebook I had taken from Simon's studio was a roadmap to a conspiracy that stretched far beyond anything I had imagined. It wasn't just about a device or a few shady characters trying to protect their interests. It was about control over information, over people, over life and death. As I pored over Simon's notes, a pattern began to emerge. There were names I recognized, figures from the upper echelons of New York's elite, politicians, businessmen, media moguls. But there were also names I didn't recognize, shadowy figures who operated behind the scenes, pulling strings from the darkness. The deeper I dug, the more I began to understand that Simon had stumbled upon a network of power that stretched across the city, linking the most powerful and the most dangerous in ways that defied easy explanation. One name kept appearing in Simon's notes: M. I didn't know who M was, but it was clear that he, or she, was at the center of whatever Simon had uncovered. The more I read, the more I became convinced that M was the key to everything. If I could find out who M was, I might be able to unravel the entire conspiracy, but I wasn't the only one looking for answers. Strange things began to happen. I'd leave my apartment and notice a black sedan idling down the street. My phone calls were interrupted by strange clicks and static. And then there were the messages, anonymous emails that appeared in my inbox, warning me to stop digging, to let Simon's death go unsolved. But I couldn't stop, even if I wanted to. I was in too deep, and the truth was the only thing that could save me now. One night, as I was working late at the office, I received a call. The voice on the other end was low and gravelly, the kind you'd expect from someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. "You're getting close, Wren," the voice said. "Too close. Who is this?" I demanded, my heart pounding. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you stop. Now. You're poking around in things you don't understand. People get hurt when they don't know when to quit. I'm not quitting, I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. Not until I find out what happened to Simon Crowley. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When the voice spoke again, it was colder, more menacing. Simon Crowley is dead because he didn't know when to walk away. Don't make the same mistake. The line went dead, leaving me with a sense of foreboding that settled like a stone in the pit of my stomach. Whoever was behind Simon's death was watching me, tracking my every move. But instead of deterring me, it only made me more determined. If they wanted me to stop, it meant I was getting close to something they didn't want uncovered. Something big. The following day, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of chasing after leads that might get me killed, I would find someone who could help me navigate this shadowy world. I needed an insider, someone who understood the game and could guide me through it without drawing too much attention. That I found that person in an unlikely place, an old contact from my days covering the police beat. Detective Lenny Gallo was a seasoned cop, the kind who had seen it all and lived to tell the tale. He was also one of the few people I trusted implicitly. We had shared drinks and stories in countless dive bars across the city, and if anyone could help me, it was him. We met at a bar on the outskirts of town, a dingy hole-in-the-wall that catered to cops, ex-cons, and the occasional journalist looking for a good story. Lenny was already at the bar when I arrived, nursing a whiskey and staring into the distance as if he was lost in thought. He looked up as I approached, his eyes narrowing as he took in my disheveled appearance. Jesus, Wren. You look like hell, he said, motioning for the bartender to bring me a drink. I feel like hell, I admitted, sliding onto the stool next to him. I need your help, Lenny. I'm in over my head. He raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. What's going on? I took a deep breath and told him everything, the notebook, the device, the mysterious M. As I spoke, I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition or alarm. But Lenny's expression remained neutral, his gaze fixed on the bottle of whiskey in front of him. When I finished, he took a long sip of his drink, then set the glass down with a heavy sigh. You're playing a dangerous game, Wren. You know that, right? I don't have a choice, I said. Simon was onto something big, something that got him killed. I can't just walk away. Lenny nodded, his eyes dark with concern. I get it. But you need to be careful. These people, they don't mess around. If they think you're a threat, they'll come after you with everything they've got. I know, I said, my voice low. But I need to find out who M is. It's the only way I can get to the bottom of this. Lenny was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. Then he leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. There's a guy, Vincent Moretti. He's an old-school fixer, the kind of guy who makes problems disappear for the right price. If anyone knows who M is, it's him. But he's not going to talk to you. Not unless you have something to offer him. What does he want? I asked, my heart sinking. Money, power, leverage. You name it. Moretti plays for keeps, and he doesn't do favors out of the goodness of his heart. If you go to him, you better have something he wants. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. And at this point, I was willing to take any lead I could get. How do I find him? Lenny scribbled an address on a napkin and handed it to me. He's got a place downtown. It's a club, but it's more than that. You'll see when you get there. Just be careful, Wren. Moretti's not someone you want to cross. I thanked him, tucking the napkin into my pocket. As I left the bar, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping deeper into a world I barely understood, a world where the rules were different, and the stakes were higher than anything I had ever faced. But there was no turning back now. I was in too deep, and the only way out was to see it through to the end. As I walked into the night, the city seemed darker, the shadows deeper, as if the very streets were conspiring against me. But I kept moving, driven by the need to uncover the truth, to expose the secrets that had claimed Simon's life and now threatened mine. Because in the end, the only way to survive in a city like New York was to drag those secrets into the light, no matter how dark they were. The glow from my laptop illuminated the darkened room, casting long shadows on the walls as I scrolled through Simon's notes for the 100th time. I'd been at it for hours, trying to piece together the puzzle that seemed to grow more complicated with every new discovery. The lines between day and night had blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and restless days, each one filled with the gnawing sense that I was getting closer to the truth, but at a cost I hadn't anticipated. Porter. The sound of my name startled me, and I looked up to see Lisa standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. She looked tired, her eyes dull with concern. It was the middle of the night, and I realized I hadn't heard her come in, hadn't even noticed that she'd been waiting for me to come to bed. Lisa, I didn't see you there, I said, closing the laptop and trying to shake off the fog of concentration. How could you? You've been glued to that thing for days, she replied, her voice tinged with a mixture of worry and frustration. That I sighed, rubbing my temples as the weight of her words settled over me. She was right. I'd been so consumed by the investigation, by Caroline and Simon's murder, that I had barely noticed the world around me, especially the world I shared with her. Our once easygoing conversations had become strained, filled with pauses and awkward silences that neither of us knew how to fill. I'm sorry, I said, standing up and walking over to her. I've just been busy. Busy? Lisa repeated, her brow furrowing. Porter, you're always busy, but this is different. You're obsessed. You barely talk to me anymore. You're up all night, and when you are home, you're distant, like you're somewhere else. I couldn't deny it. I had been distant. But how could I explain what was happening without dragging her into the mess I'd gotten myself into? How could I make her understand that I wasn't just chasing a story, that I was caught up in something dark and dangerous that I didn't fully understand? I'm working on a big story, Lisa, I said, choosing my words carefully. It's complicated, and it's taking up a lot of my time, but I promise, once it's over, things will go back to normal. She stared at me, her eyes searching mine for some hint of the man she had married, the man who had always made time for her, even in the midst of the most intense stories. But I could see the doubt in her expression, the nagging suspicion that something was very wrong. Is it just the story? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That I hesitated, the question hanging in the air between us. I could lie, tell her that everything was fine, that I was just caught up in the work, but the truth was, it wasn't just the story. It was Caroline, her tragic allure, and the way she had drawn me into her world of secrets and lies. I was too far gone to pretend that she didn't affect me, that my fascination with her wasn't tearing at the fabric of my marriage. "Porter," Lisa said, stepping closer to me, her eyes pleading. "If there's something going on, if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know. I can't keep feeling like I'm losing you." The pain in her voice cut through me like a knife, and for a moment, I considered telling her everything, about Caroline, about Simon, about the dark forces I was uncovering. But how could I do that to her? How could I burden her with the knowledge that her husband was being pulled into a dangerous game, one that could cost him everything? "There's nothing going on, Lisa," I said finally, forcing a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. "I'm just tired. I'll finish this story, and then we'll take a break. Just the two of us, somewhere far away from all of this." She nodded, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. "I hope you're right, Porter. I really do. Because I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, feeling like I'm competing with your job, with your stories, with whatever it is that's pulling you away from me." Guilt washed over me, but I pushed it aside, pulling her into an embrace. "I'm here, Lisa. I'm not going anywhere." But as I held her, I knew that was a lie. I was already somewhere else, caught between the life I had built with Lisa and the dark underworld that Simon's murder had dragged me into. And the more I tried to balance the two, the more I felt them slipping away from me. That night, Lisa went to bed alone, and I stayed up, staring at the closed laptop on my desk. I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, the choices I had made leading me further away from the life I had promised her. I had always prided myself on being able to separate my work from my personal life, but now the lines were blurring, and I was losing sight of who I was and what mattered most. The next morning, as I left for work, Lisa kissed me goodbye, but there was a distance in her touch that hadn't been there before. It was subtle, but it was there, a crack in the foundation of our marriage that I feared would only grow wider with time. At the office, I tried to throw myself back into the investigation, but my mind kept drifting back to Lisa, to the way she had looked at me the night before. I knew I was hurting her, and it killed me to see the strain I was putting on our relationship. But every time I thought about walking away from the case, from Caroline, something pulled me back in, a need to uncover the truth, to solve the mystery that had taken over my life. That I was living in two worlds, and I was losing my grip on both. The case was consuming me, and my marriage was slipping through my fingers. But I couldn't stop. I was too close to the truth, too close to uncovering the secrets that had claimed Simon's life and now threatened my own. And as much as I wanted to fix things with Lisa, I knew that I couldn't, not until I saw this through to the end. But I was beginning to realize that the end I was chasing might be my own. The sound of my phone ringing jolted me awake. It was just past dawn, and the sky outside was a bruised shade of gray. I fumbled for the phone, squinting at the screen through the haze of sleep. The caller ID read "unknown," which immediately set my nerves on edge. "Hello?" I croaked, struggling to shake off the last remnants of sleep. "Porter, Wren." The voice on the other end was smooth, almost too smooth, with an edge that sent a chill down my spine. "I have something that I think you'll find very interesting." I sat up, my heart racing. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled softly, the sound more sinister than reassuring. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in your recent activities. You've been digging into matters that are delicate. What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound authoritative. "I want you to stop," the voice said. "You're poking around in things that don't concern you. If you continue, the consequences will be dire. For you, and for the people you care about." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. I knew that threats were a part of the job, but this was different. This wasn't a disgruntled source or an irate reader. This was someone with real power, someone who knew exactly what buttons to push to get under my skin. That I pulled on a pair of jeans and a jacket, my mind racing. I had to talk to Lisa. She deserved to know what was happening, even if it meant risking her safety. I couldn't keep her in the dark any longer, not with the stakes getting higher by the day. When I got home, the apartment was eerily quiet. Lisa was still asleep, and I tiptoed into our bedroom, my heart pounding. I gently shook her awake, her eyes fluttering open with a mix of confusion and concern. "Porter. What's wrong?" "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's important." Lisa sat up, her expression turning serious. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I've been receiving threats. People who don't want me digging into Simon's death. They're saying they'll come after me and anyone close to me if I don't back off." Lisa's eyes widened in shock, and she reached out to take my hand. "What do they want from you?" "They want me to stop investigating," I said. "But I can't. Not now. I'm too close to something big. But I wanted you to know what's happening. I don't want you to be caught off guard if something happens." Lisa's grip tightened on my hand, her face pale with worry. "Porter, this sounds dangerous. Maybe you should just walk away." "I don't want to lose you." "I can't just walk away," I said, my voice filled with desperation. "Not after everything I've uncovered. If I back off now, it's like admitting defeat. But I promise I'll be careful. I won't put you in danger if I can help it." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine for any sign that I was making the right decision. "You need to be careful, Porter. These people, they don't mess around. And if they're threatening you, they could come after us both." "I know," I said softly. "I'll do everything I can to keep you safe. I just need you to trust me." Lisa nodded slowly, her face etched with concern. "Okay. But promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll think about our safety, too." "I promise," I said, though a part of me felt that it was a promise I might not be able to keep. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and tension. I had to remain vigilant, always aware of my surroundings. Every time I saw a black sedan or a stranger watching me from a distance, my heart would race. The threats had escalated from phone calls to ominous messages left on my car windshield. It was clear that whoever was behind this wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty. Despite my best efforts, the strain began to show. My focus was split between the investigation and the constant worry about Lisa's safety. I couldn't afford to slip up, but I also couldn't afford to ignore the growing rift in my marriage. I tried to keep up appearances, to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the weight of the situation was taking its toll. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received a text message from an unknown number. The message was simple but chilling: "You're getting too close. Consider this a warning." It was accompanied by a photo of Lisa, taken from outside our apartment. The sight of it made my blood run cold. It wasn't just my safety that was at risk, it was hers as well. That I immediately called Lisa, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Panic set in as I raced home, my mind racing with the worst possible scenarios. When I arrived, I found the apartment in darkness, the front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded in my chest as I pushed the door open, stepping inside with caution. "Lisa?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no answer. I moved through the apartment, checking each room, my fear escalating with every passing second. When I finally reached our bedroom, I found Lisa sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Porter," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know where you were. I was so scared." I rushed to her side, wrapping my arms around her, my own fear momentarily forgotten as I focused on calming her. "It's okay, Lisa. I'm here now. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to worry you." She clung to me, her body trembling. "They've been watching us, haven't they? I saw a car outside earlier. I thought something was going to happen." I nodded, my heart aching at the sight of her fear. "Yes. They're trying to intimidate me, to make me back off. But I won't. Not until I find out the truth." Lisa looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I know you can't just walk away, but we need to do something. We can't keep living like this. It's tearing us apart." "I know," I said softly. "We'll find a way to get through this. I'll figure out how to protect us, but I need you to stay strong. We're in this together." As we held each other, I realized that the danger wasn't just about the investigation anymore. It was about our lives, our future. I was playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. But I had to see it through. For Lisa, for Simon, and for the truth that had become my obsession, that I had to find a way to navigate this perilous path, to outwit the people threatening us and uncover the secrets that lay hidden in the darkness. Because in the end, the only way to survive in this dangerous game was to face the darkness head-on, no matter the cost. The dim light of the cafe was a stark contrast to the cold, hard glare of the city outside. I sat at a corner table, the remains of a once-hot coffee growing cold as I stared at the door, waiting for Caroline. The cafe was a small, unassuming place, one that seemed to hide from the world's chaos behind its worn wooden counters and faded wallpaper. It was here, away from the prying eyes of the city, that I intended to confront Caroline and unravel the truth. When Caroline finally walked in, her presence filled the room despite the understated elegance of her outfit. She wore a simple black dress and a tailored coat, her blonde hair cascading in waves around her shoulders. She looked every bit the picture of sophistication and grace, but I knew there was more to her than met the eye. She spotted me immediately and made her way over, a warm smile on her face that did little to dispel the growing unease in my stomach. As she sat down across from me, her eyes met mine with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Porter," she said softly, her voice like velvet. "Thank you for meeting me." I forced a smile, trying to keep my emotions in check. I wanted to talk. There are things I need to understand. Caroline's smile faltered slightly, but she remained composed. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I've been doing some digging, Caroline. About Simon's film, about his notes. And I've come to realize that there's more to this story than I originally thought." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a flicker of apprehension crossing her face. "I don't understand." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'm starting to question whether you're as innocent as you appear," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Simon was involved in something dangerous, something that could have put him in the crosshairs of powerful people. But there's also the possibility that you knew more than you've let on." Caroline's expression hardened, and she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defensively. "Are you suggesting that I'm somehow responsible for Simon's death?" "I'm not suggesting anything," I replied. "But I need to know the truth. The more I dig, the more I realize that there are layers to this case that haven't been uncovered. And you're at the center of it." Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite place: anger, fear, or maybe a mix of both. "Porter, I understand that you're under pressure, but accusing me of something I didn't do isn't going to help you find the truth." "I'm not accusing you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm just trying to understand your role in all of this. Why did you come to me? Why not go to the police or another journalist?" Caroline's gaze dropped to her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "I came to you because I trusted you. Simon had a reputation for uncovering the truth, and I thought you might be able to do the same. And yet," I pressed, "you've been very selective about what information you've shared. You've kept things from me, things that might have changed the course of the investigation." Her eyes met mine again, and there was a weariness in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Simon was involved in something dangerous. He was working on a project that threatened powerful people. I didn't want to involve anyone else because I didn't want to endanger them. And I certainly didn't want to put you at risk." "But you did put me at risk," I said. "You put me in a situation where I'm now being threatened, where my marriage is falling apart. And for what? To uncover a truth that might be more dangerous than the lies we started with." Caroline's face flushed, her composure cracking. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't realize how deep Simon's involvement was or how dangerous it would become. I thought that by working with you, we could uncover the truth together and maybe even bring those responsible to justice." "Justice?" I repeated. "Or is it something more? Is there an agenda you haven't shared with me? Because right now, I'm finding it hard to trust anyone in this mess." Caroline looked away, her fingers nervously tapping on the table. "I understand your skepticism. But you have to believe that I'm as much a victim in this as you are. Simon's death has shattered my life, and I'm just trying to make sense of it all. If I've kept things from you, it was to protect you and to protect myself." I studied her, trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. There was a part of me that wanted to believe her, to trust that she was genuinely seeking the truth. But there was also a nagging feeling that I was missing something crucial, something that could turn the entire investigation on its head. "Tell me everything, Caroline," I said finally, my voice resolute. "Tell me the whole truth. Because right now, I'm caught between the truth and the lies, and I need to know where you stand. If we're going to get through this, we need to be honest with each other." Caroline hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the door as if searching for an escape. Then she took a deep breath and nodded, her voice trembling slightly as she began to speak. "Simon was working on a film about corruption, about a network of powerful people who were manipulating the system for their own gain," she said. "He stumbled upon something that was bigger than we could have ever imagined. He was threatened, but he didn't stop. He thought that if he could expose the truth, he could make a difference." "And you?" I asked. "What's your role in this? Are you involved in the corruption, or were you just caught in the crossfire?" Caroline looked at me with a mixture of desperation and resolve. "I was never involved in the corruption. I loved Simon, and I wanted to help him. But the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. I tried to protect him, but I couldn't stop what happened." Her words hung in the air, and I could see the pain and fear in her eyes. Whether or not she was telling the whole truth, I couldn't be sure. But for now, it seemed that we were on the same side, trying to navigate a dangerous game that had left both of us vulnerable. As we left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that the answers I sought were still just out of reach, hidden behind a veil of deception and half-truths. But for now, I had to take Caroline's words at face value and continue the investigation, even if it meant risking everything I held dear. The stakes were higher than ever, and the lines between truth and lies were growing increasingly blurred. But one thing was clear: if I wanted to uncover the real story behind Simon's murder, I had to confront the darkness head-on, no matter where it led. The city's skyline loomed outside my office window, a stark reminder of the world I was up against. The buildings, which once seemed like symbols of opportunity and success, now felt like prison walls, closing in on me. The investigation had consumed my life, dragging me into a web of deceit and danger that seemed to tighten with every passing day. My curiosity, once a tool for uncovering the truth, had become a relentless beast, threatening to devour everything I held dear. I stared at the stack of files on my desk, each one filled with snippets of information, leads, and dead ends. I was so close to the truth, or so I hoped, but every revelation seemed to come with a new set of complications. My phone buzzed with a new message, and I glanced at the screen, seeing another anonymous threat. It was the same old game, veiled warnings and sinister implications that only deepened my resolve to continue, but the threats weren't the only thing weighing on me. The real cost of my obsession was becoming increasingly apparent in my personal life. The tension between Lisa and me had reached a breaking point, and it was only a matter of time before something had to give. That evening, as I walked through the front door of our apartment, the silence was palpable. Lisa was home, but she was clearly distant. She sat on the couch, her gaze fixed on the television but clearly not watching it. I could see the strain in her shoulders, the fatigue in her eyes. It was a stark contrast to the vibrant, loving woman I had married. "Hey," I said softly, closing the door behind me. "How was your day?" She looked up, her expression a mix of exhaustion and frustration. "It was fine," she said, her voice lacking its usual warmth. "Just another day." I could tell that she was holding back, and I knew that our conversations had become increasingly superficial. The deep, meaningful exchanges that had once defined our relationship were now replaced with curt replies and awkward silences. It was like trying to bridge a chasm that had grown too wide to cross. "I'm sorry I've been so distant," I said, trying to break through the tension. "I know I've been wrapped up in this case, but I didn't mean to push you away." Lisa's eyes met mine, and there was a sadness in them that cut through me. "It's not just the case, Porter. It's everything. You're so focused on this investigation that you're forgetting about us. About me." "I'm trying to make things better," I said, my voice tinged with frustration. "I'm doing this for a reason. I'm trying to find the truth, to make a difference." "But at what cost?" Lisa asked, her voice rising with emotion. "You're losing yourself in this case, and in the process, you're losing me. I feel like I'm just an afterthought in your life." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew she was right. My relentless pursuit of the truth had come at a steep price, and I had failed to see how deeply it was affecting her. I had been so consumed with the investigation that I had neglected the one person who had always been my rock. "I'm sorry, Lisa," I said, my voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I've been blind to how much this is tearing us apart." Lisa's eyes were filled with tears, and she shook her head, struggling to hold back her emotions. "It's not just about the investigation, Porter. It's about how you've changed. You're different, and I don't know how to reach you anymore. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't know if we can come back from this." I reached out to her, trying to bridge the gap that had grown between us. "Please, Lisa. Let me fix this. I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. I want to make things right." She pulled away, her face etched with pain. "I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if you can fix what's broken between us. I need to know that you're still the man I married, not just someone consumed by a case." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, and I felt a deep sense of despair. I had sacrificed so much in pursuit of the truth, and now it seemed that the price was my marriage, my sanity, and perhaps even my life. As I watched Lisa leave the room, I felt a pang of regret and helplessness. The investigation had become a black hole, pulling everything into its orbit, and I was caught in its gravitational pull, unable to escape. That night, I sat alone in the darkened apartment, the silence around me almost deafening. I reflected on the choices I had made, the paths I had taken, and the consequences that had followed. The pursuit of truth, which had once been my driving force, had turned into a destructive force, leaving a trail of wreckage in its wake. That I knew that I had to make a decision, that I had to find a way to balance the investigation with the life I had almost lost. But the deeper I went, the more entangled I became in the dangerous game I was playing. Every step forward seemed to push me further from the person I used to be and the life I had once cherished. That as I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I realized that the cost of my curiosity had become too great. The investigation was no longer just about finding the truth, it was about reckoning with the price I had paid and trying to salvage what remained. That I had to confront the reality of my situation, to face the choices I had made and the impact they had on the people I loved. And as I grappled with the consequences of my actions, I knew that the path to redemption would be long and arduous. The cost of curiosity was steep, and the road ahead was uncertain. But if I wanted to reclaim my life and the relationship that meant the world to me, I had to find a way to navigate the treacherous terrain that lay before me. The flickering light of my desk lamp cast long shadows across the cluttered room as I sat surrounded by the remnants of Simon Crowley's work. The files, notes, and photographs were a testament to the relentless pursuit of truth that had consumed my life for the past few months. Yet despite the piles of evidence and leads, one crucial piece remained elusive. Caroline had handed me a final, incomplete reel of Simon's film, claiming it contained the key to understanding his murder. I had put off viewing it, unsure of what it might reveal and dreading the impact it might have on my already fragile state. But now, with the investigation reaching its climax, I knew that the time had come to face the final piece of the puzzle. That I carefully unspooled the reel, the film's surface glinting under the light. The projector was an old model I had borrowed from a friend, a fittingly antique tool for a case that seemed to belong to another era. As I set it up and adjusted the focus, I felt a knot of tension in my chest. This was the moment of truth, and I could only hope it would be worth the cost. The projector whirred to life, casting the first frames of the film onto the wall. The image was grainy but clear enough to make out the scene, a dimly lit room filled with a group of people seated around a table. Simon's voice, calm and authoritative, filled the room as he began to narrate, "This footage is part of the last project I worked on before my death. What you're about to see is the truth about the people behind the corruption I've been investigating." The camera panned across the room, revealing the faces of several individuals I recognized from the investigation, powerful figures who had seemed untouchable. The most notable among them was a man I had seen in multiple high-profile meetings and events, a prominent businessman with connections to the city's elite. Simon's voice continued, the tension in his tone evident. "These are the people who have been manipulating events from the shadows, orchestrating the corruption that has plagued this city. They have managed to stay hidden, their influence reaching into every corner of power." As Simon's narrative unfolded, the film revealed shocking footage of covert meetings, illicit transactions, and damning evidence of the extent of their control. It was clear that Simon had stumbled upon something monumental, something that threatened the very foundation of the corruption network he was exposing. Then came the crucial moment. The camera focused on a document laid out on the table, a detailed report outlining the connections between the corruption network and several high-profile individuals. Among the names listed were influential figures I had encountered during my investigation. their roles and connections meticulously documented. Simon's voice grew more urgent. I've compiled this evidence to expose the truth, but my time is running short. If something happens to me, this footage will be my last testament. The people responsible for my death are not only guilty of corruption but of silencing anyone who dares to stand in their way. The film cut abruptly, leaving a stark, unresolved silence. The projector's light faded, and I was left staring at the blank wall, the weight of the revelation settling heavily on my shoulders. It was clear now that Simon's murder was not a random act of violence but a calculated move by those who wanted to protect their empire of deceit. His death was a direct consequence of his attempt to expose them, and the evidence he had gathered was a powerful weapon in the fight for justice. I sat in the darkness, the implications of the footage sinking in. The powerful individuals Simon had implicated were not just connected to his death but were also behind the threats and dangers I had faced throughout the investigation. They were the same people who had sought to silence me, who had put my life and my marriage at risk. That I knew what I had to do. The evidence needed to be made public, the truth needed to be exposed, no matter the personal cost. But I also knew that this revelation would come with its own set of dangers. The people behind Simon's murder were not to be underestimated, and their reach extended far beyond what I had imagined. The next steps would require careful planning and a strategy to ensure that the truth reached the right hands without jeopardizing my safety and that of those I cared about. I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies who could help me navigate the treacherous waters ahead. As I gathered the film and the supporting documents, I made a silent vow to see this through to the end. Simon's sacrifice and the risk I had taken would not be in vain. The truth needed to be revealed, and the powerful figures who had orchestrated his death needed to be held accountable. With the final piece of the puzzle in hand, I prepared for the next stage of the journey, one that would test my resolve and my ability to confront the darkness that had engulfed my life. The cost of curiosity had been steep, but now it was time to turn that curiosity into a force for justice, no matter the personal cost. The night was cloaked in darkness as I approached the towering skyscraper where the powerful individuals behind Simon Crowley's murder had their headquarters. The city below was a maze of lights and shadows, but above me, the elite lived in their own world, insulated from the chaos and danger that gripped the streets. I had meticulously planned this confrontation, knowing that it could be my final act of defiance. The evidence I had collected was irrefutable, and I was ready to confront those responsible for Simon's death and the threats that had plagued my life. But as I neared the entrance, the weight of the choices ahead pressed heavily on my mind. The price of my pursuit of the truth had been steep, and I was about to pay an even higher cost. I stepped into the lobby, my heart pounding as I approached the security desk. I had secured a visitor's pass under the pretense of a meeting with one of the executives. The guards barely gave me a second glance as I made my way to the elevator, my nerves on edge. The elevator ascended slowly, the numbers ticking upward as I mentally prepared for the confrontation that awaited me. I reviewed the plan in my mind: confront the key figures, expose their involvement, and ensure that the evidence reached the right authorities. It was a high-stakes gamble, one that could either bring justice or lead to catastrophic consequences. As the elevator doors opened on the top floor, I stepped into a luxurious corridor lined with expensive artwork and polished marble. The hallway led to a large boardroom, where I knew the key players would be gathered. I took a deep breath and approached the doors, pushing them open with determination. Inside, the room was filled with a group of well-dressed individuals engaged in animated discussion. They fell silent as I entered, their expressions a mix of surprise and wariness. At the head of the table stood a man I recognized from Simon's film, the prominent businessman who seemed to be at the center of the corruption network. "Mr. Wren," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "What a surprise! To what do we owe the pleasure?" I took a step forward, my gaze unwavering. "I have evidence that implicates all of you in Simon Crowley's murder and the corruption that he was trying to expose. It's all here," I said, holding up a briefcase containing the documents and film footage. The room was filled with a tense silence as the individuals exchanged uneasy glances. The businessman's face remained impassive, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Wren," he said, his tone laced with menace. "You have no idea what you're up against." "I'm not afraid," I replied, my voice steady despite the danger. "The truth needs to come out. People need to know what you've done." Before I could continue, the door to the boardroom burst open, and several security personnel entered, their expressions grim. It was clear that the confrontation had been anticipated, and the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. The businessman's gaze hardened, and he gave a subtle nod to his security team. "It seems you've overstayed your welcome, Mr. Wren." The guards moved toward me, their presence a stark reminder of the peril I was in. I knew I had to act quickly. I turned to the businessman, desperation and resolve mingling in my eyes. "If you have any humanity left, you'll stop this now. Let the truth be known, and let justice be served." His expression remained unchanged, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps regret or calculation. "You're too late, Porter. The wheels are already in motion." As the security personnel closed in, I realized that my plan had been compromised. The confrontation was turning into a battle for survival, and I had to find a way to escape and ensure that the evidence reached the right hands. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a message. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from Lisa, "We need to talk. It's urgent." The message was a jolt of reality, a reminder of the personal cost of my investigation. The choice before me was stark: continue to pursue the truth at the risk of losing everything, or find a way to salvage my marriage and protect the people I love. As the guards advanced, I made a split-second decision. I grabbed the briefcase and made a dash for the exit, the evidence clutched tightly in my hand. I knew that leaving now meant abandoning the confrontation, but I had to prioritize the safety of my loved ones and the chance to rebuild what had been broken. I burst into the hallway, sprinting toward the elevator. The sounds of footsteps and shouts echoed behind me as I raced down the corridor. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the precarious balance I was trying to maintain. When the elevator doors finally opened, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The descent seemed interminable, the tension mounting with every passing second. As I emerged into the lobby, I saw Lisa waiting by the entrance, her face a mixture of relief and worry. She rushed toward me, and I could see the pain and concern in her eyes. "Porter, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'll explain everything," I said, pulling her into a tight embrace. But right now, we need to get out of here. It's not safe. As we hurried out of the building, the weight of the choices I had made settled heavily on my shoulders. The confrontation had been a failure in terms of directly bringing the corrupt individuals to justice, but it had also been a sobering reminder of what truly mattered. I in the car, as we drove away from the scene, Lisa looked at me with a mix of hope and uncertainty. What now? I took a deep breath, knowing that the road ahead would be challenging. We need to regroup. I'll make sure the evidence reaches the right people and ensure that the truth is revealed. But we also need to focus on us, on rebuilding what's been lost. As the city lights faded in the rearview mirror, I felt a sense of resolve. The cost of my curiosity had been immense, but it was not too late to make things right. The fight for truth and justice was far from over, but I now understood that I needed to balance that fight with the preservation of the relationships that mattered most. The path forward would be difficult and fraught with challenges, but I was determined to see it through. The confrontation had been just one chapter in a larger story, and it was up to me to write the next one, guided by the lessons I had learned and the choices I had made. The city that had once felt like a maze of possibilities now seemed like a trap, closing in on me from all sides. The fallout from the confrontation at the skyscraper was swift and brutal. My attempt to balance the pursuit of truth with protecting my family had led to unforeseen and dangerous consequences. Lisa and I had retreated to a safe house on the outskirts of the city, a nondescript suburban home that offered a temporary refuge from the chaos. Yet, even here, the tension was palpable. The phone calls and messages had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was more ominous than any threat. I could sense that the calm before the storm was merely a prelude to something far more dangerous. The evidence I had managed to protect was in the hands of trusted allies, a few journalists and activists who had agreed to help me make it public. But the powerful figures behind Simon's murder were not idle. They had resources and connections that extended far beyond what I had anticipated. The danger was escalating, and I could feel the noose tightening point one evening, as Lisa and I sat at the kitchen table, discussing our next steps. There was a sudden knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. We had been careful to keep our location secret, and any unexpected visitors were a cause for concern. I glanced at Lisa, her eyes wide with fear. "I'll check," I said, trying to sound calm. I approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. A group of men in dark suits and sunglasses stood outside, their presence menacing and deliberate. I recognized them as part of the security detail from the skyscraper, now clearly acting on behalf of those behind Simon's murder. I turned to Lisa, who had come up behind me, her face pale. "It's them," I said quietly. "We need to get out of here, now." Before we could move, there was a loud crash as the door was forcibly kicked open. The men stormed into the house, their expressions grim and unyielding. I grabbed Lisa's hand and we sprinted for the back door, but not before one of the intruders managed to tackle me to the ground. The struggle was frantic and brutal. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, but the attackers were well trained and relentless. Lisa's terrified cries echoed through the house as she tried to fend off another assailant. My mind raced as I tried to protect her, but the odds were quickly stacking against us. In a moment of clarity amid the chaos, I saw one of the men reaching for a briefcase on the floor, the same briefcase containing the evidence we had fought so hard to protect. Desperation surged through me, and I managed to push my attacker off and grab the briefcase, clutching it tightly. "Lisa, run!" I shouted, pushing her toward the back door. She hesitated for a split second before bolting outside. I followed as best as I could, but the intruders were closing in. We fled into the night, the darkened streets offering scant cover. I could hear the distant sounds of sirens, but they felt miles away from the immediate danger we faced. My thoughts were a jumble of fear and determination. We needed to find safety, but I also had to ensure that the evidence reached the right hands. As we reached a nearby alley, we took a moment to catch our breath. Lisa was visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she looked at me with a mix of relief and concern. "What are we going to do, Porter?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "They're not going to stop. They'll keep coming after us." "I know," I said, my own voice heavy with the weight of our predicament. "We need to get the evidence to the authorities and make sure it's protected. But first, we have to make sure we're safe." Our plan to expose the truth had become a deadly game, and the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. The powerful figures behind Simon's murder were ruthless and determined to protect their interests at any cost. My attempts to shield my family had inadvertently put them in the crosshairs, and now we were all in jeopardy. As we made our way through the winding streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The sense of being pursued was almost palpable, and I knew that our every move was being monitored. The reality of our situation hit hard. We were in too deep, and the fight for justice had become a fight for survival. We reached a safe location, a contact I had established earlier in the investigation who could help us get the evidence to the authorities. As we handed over the briefcase, I could see the anxiety in his eyes. He understood the gravity of the situation, but the risks involved were immense. "This is our only chance," I said, my voice filled with determination. "Make sure this gets to the right people. It's our only shot at bringing them down." The contact nodded, understanding the stakes. "I'll make sure it's handled properly. But you need to lay low and stay safe." As we left the meeting, the weight of our situation settled heavily on me. The investigation had turned into a deadly pursuit, and I had paid a steep price. My marriage, my career, and my safety were all at risk, and I had to navigate a treacherous path to protect the people I loved and seek justice for Simon. The fall had been swift and unforgiving, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. But I knew that the fight was far from over. I had to confront the consequences of my actions and find a way to emerge from the darkness that had engulfed my life. As I looked at Lisa, her face etched with worry but also with a glimmer of hope, I understood the true cost of my pursuit. The fall had been harsh, but it was up to me to rise again and fight for what was right. The path forward would be challenging, but I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains of our new safe house, casting a muted glow across the room. Lisa and I had retreated to a small, nondescript apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the chaos of our previous life. The move was part of a desperate attempt to stay one step ahead of those who sought to silence us. The evidence had been handed off to the authorities, but the threat of reprisal lingered like a shadow over our lives. The past few weeks had been a blur of constant movement and uncertainty. The once familiar routines of our lives had been upended, replaced by the stark reality of living under constant threat. The constant vigilance had taken its toll on both of us, our nerves frayed by the ceaseless pressure. Sitting at the small kitchen table, I stared at the pile of documents and news clippings spread out before me. The evidence that had once seemed like a beacon of truth now felt like a heavy burden. The authorities had received it, but whether it would be enough to bring down the powerful figures behind Simon's murder was uncertain. The repercussions of our actions had been swift and brutal, and I was left grappling with the consequences. Lisa sat across from me, her expression a mixture of worry and resignation. The strain on our relationship was evident, the emotional distance between us growing as the weight of our situation took its toll. "Porter," Lisa said quietly, breaking the silence. "We need to talk about what's next. We can't keep living like this. We need to decide if we're going to continue fighting or if it's time to walk away." Her words hit me like a cold splash of water. I had been so consumed by the drive for justice and the pursuit of the truth that I hadn't fully considered the toll it was taking on us. The choices I had made had not only endangered our lives but had also pushed our relationship to the brink. That I looked at her, the pain in her eyes mirroring the turmoil within me. "I know," I said, my voice heavy with regret. "I've been so focused on exposing the truth that I didn't realize how much it was costing us." Lisa took a deep breath, her fingers nervously tapping on the edge of the table. "We've already risked so much. If we continue, we might lose everything, our safety, our future, and each other. But if we walk away now, we might never see justice for Simon or for ourselves." The dilemma was stark and unforgiving. On one hand, exposing the truth could potentially bring down the corrupt network and deliver a measure of justice for Simon. It could also serve as a form of redemption for the mistakes I had made. On the other hand, continuing the fight could result in further danger and destruction, possibly irreversibly damaging our lives and our relationship. I knew that whatever decision we made would shape the rest of our lives. The thought of abandoning the fight was painful, but so was the idea of continuing down a path that could lead to more suffering. The balance between seeking justice and protecting what remained of our lives was delicate and fraught with uncertainty. As I pondered our options, I remembered the faces of those who had been affected by Simon's death and the ripple effect of the corruption that had been uncovered. The evidence I had fought so hard to protect was in the hands of people who could make a difference, but the wheels of justice turned slowly, and there were no guarantees. Lisa reached across the table, her hand resting gently on mine. "Whatever we decide, we need to be in this together. We've already come so far, and I don't want to lose us in the process." Her words struck a chord deep within me. The realization of what truly mattered, our safety, our future, and our relationship, was a sobering reminder of the human cost of my actions. The pursuit of justice was important, but it was not worth sacrificing everything we held dear. I took a deep breath, making a decision that was both painful and liberating. "You're right. We need to protect ourselves and our future. The fight for justice will continue, but we need to focus on rebuilding our lives and finding a way to move forward." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, a mixture of relief and sadness. Thank you for making this decision. It's not easy, but it's the right one. We embraced the weight of our choices and the uncertainty of the future hanging heavy over us. The path to redemption or ruin was no longer just a theoretical concept, it was a real and present decision that would determine the course of our lives. That I and the days that followed, we focused on rebuilding what we had lost. We sought counseling to help navigate the emotional scars left by the ordeal and began to plan for a future that would allow us to start anew. The fight for justice was far from over, but it was no longer our immediate priority. The evidence we had uncovered remained a powerful testament to the corruption and wrongdoing we had exposed. It was in the hands of those who could make a difference, and while we could no longer be the front lines of that battle, we hoped that our efforts would contribute to a larger cause. As we worked to reclaim our lives, the journey of redemption or ruin continued. The choices we made had altered our course, but they also offered a chance for renewal and a chance to rebuild what had been broken. The road ahead was uncertain, but with Lisa by my side, I felt a glimmer of hope that we could find a way forward together, regardless of the challenges that lay ahead. The dawn of a new day brought with it a fragile sense of peace. The city outside was bustling with its usual rhythm, oblivious to the turmoil that had recently consumed my life. From the window of our modest apartment, the skyline of New York seemed like a distant memory of a life that had been both exhilarating and perilous. The shadows of the past few months were still fresh, but there was a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to lift. The investigation into Simon Crowley's murder had concluded with the exposure of the corrupt network and the arrest of several key figures. The evidence I had fought so hard to protect had played a significant role in unraveling a web of deceit. The authorities were now handling the case, and while the outcome was far from perfect, it was a testament to the truth we had uncovered. That I spent my mornings walking through the quiet streets of our new neighborhood, a place far removed from the intense drama of our former life. The routine was calming, a grounding force that helped me process the events of the past. The familiar sights of children playing in the park and the soft murmur of conversations at local cafes were a stark contrast to the danger and secrecy that had defined our recent existence. One afternoon, Lisa and I sat together in our small living room, the space now a sanctuary from the chaos. The apartment was modest, but we had worked hard to make it feel like home. It was a place where we could begin to heal and rebuild, away from the shadows that had once loomed over us. I've been thinking a lot, Lisa said, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. About what we want for the future. We've been through so much, and it's time to start looking ahead. I looked at her, the strength and resilience she had shown throughout our ordeal inspiring me. Her presence was a constant reminder of the things that truly mattered. I've been thinking the same thing, I said. It's been a long road, and there are scars that will never fully heal, but we need to focus on moving forward. We had been in touch with counselors and support groups, trying to navigate the emotional aftermath of the case. The impact on our relationship had been profound, but we were committed to working through it together. The sessions had provided us with valuable tools for rebuilding trust and finding new ways to connect. Lisa had also taken up painting as a form of therapy, a creative outlet that allowed her to express her emotions and find solace. Her paintings adorned the walls of our apartment, each one a reflection of her journey through the turbulence of the past. It was a beautiful reminder of her strength and her ability to find light even in the darkest times. For me, writing had become a way to process and make sense of the experiences we had endured. I started working on a memoir, capturing the truth behind the investigation and the lessons learned along the way. It was a cathartic exercise, allowing me to confront my own feelings of guilt and redemption while providing a sense of closure. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the past began to feel a little lighter. The intense scrutiny and danger had faded, replaced by a semblance of normalcy. We were finding our rhythm again, learning to appreciate the small joys of life that had been overshadowed by our struggles. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sun set over the city, I felt a sense of quiet contentment. The view was breathtaking, a reminder of the beauty that still existed in the world. It was a moment of clarity and calm, a chance to reflect on the journey we had undertaken and the resilience that had carried us through. "The city is still full of life," Lisa said, her voice soft. "Even after everything we've been through, it feels like there's hope." I nodded, taking in the view. It does. It's easy to forget that sometimes, but there's always a chance for renewal, for finding peace. The shadows of the past would always be a part of us, etched into our memories and our experiences. But as we looked forward, we were determined to embrace the possibilities of the future. The scars might never fully heal, but they were a testament to our strength and our capacity to overcome. With each passing day, the shadows lifted a little more, revealing a path forward filled with new opportunities and the promise of a brighter future. The journey had been fraught with challenges, but it had also brought us closer together and helped us rediscover what truly mattered. As we faced the future, we did so with the knowledge that while the past had shaped us, it did not define us. We were ready to embrace the next chapter of our lives, guided by the lessons learned and the hope that the shadows of the past would continue to fade, making way for a new beginning.